The space station was alive with the noise of trade day. Voices in dozens of languages bounced off the high metal ceilings, and the scent of alien spices drifted through the air. Ships of all shapes and sizes were docked outside, bringing merchants, warriors, and travelers from across the galaxy. For Evan, a human mechanic who worked in the cargo bays, it was just another long day of carrying tools, fixing faulty loaders, and trying not to get caught in the crowd of alien customers. He was pushing a small cart filled with replacement parts when he noticed the crowd ahead parting like water. People stepped aside quickly, and some lowered their eyes as if avoiding trouble. Evan looked up and saw why. She was huge. The alien woman stood at least twice his height, her broad shoulders wrapped in dark leather armor that was decorated with bronze patterns. A heavy blade hung at her side, and her deep red skin caught the light from the market lamps. Her black hair was braided with metal beads that clicked softly as she walked. She carried herself like someone who feared nothing. Evan knew of her kind. They were called the Virexen, a proud warrior race who lived for battle and honor. Most humans avoided them because their temper was as legendary as their size. But Evan had always been curious about other cultures, and there was something about the scars that ran across her arm and down her neck that caught his attention. They were not ugly, not to him. They looked like proof of survival. She stopped at a stall to examine some sort of alien fruit. Evan, without really thinking, stepped closer and said in a calm voice, "Those scars, they suit you. They make you look like someone who's been through more than most could survive." He meant it as a simple compliment. He had seen many warriors hide their scars, but she carried hers proudly. To him, that was strength. The giantess turned her head slowly and looked down at him, her yellow eyes locked on his face, unblinking. The market noise seemed to fade around them. For a moment, Evan thought she might be offended, but then her mouth curved into the smallest of smiles. "You speak the binding words," she said. Her voice was deep, almost like a drum. Evan blinked. "The what now?" She straightened her back, her armor shifting with the movement. "You honor my scars and my survival in the same breath. In my people's law, that is a vow. You have chosen me." Evan let out a nervous laugh, thinking she was joking. "Chosen you?" "No, I was just—" She raised a large hand, silencing him instantly. "It is done. You will come with me to the Enclave." The joining rites must begin. Around them, a few merchants had stopped to watch. Some of them smirked, others looked at him with pity. A small reptilian trader muttered, "Poor human doesn't know what he's gotten into." Evan's stomach twisted. "Look, I think there's been a mistake," he began, but she was already walking, expecting him to follow. Her long strides forced him to hurry just to keep up. The Enclave was located in a quieter section of the station, where the air smelled faintly of smoke and metal. The walls were draped with banners marked by claw-like symbols. Inside, more Virexen warriors moved about, some sharpening weapons, others engaged in arm-wrestling contests that shook the tables. When Kayla, as Evan overheard one warrior call her, entered with him in tow, the conversation shifted. The warriors looked over, some grinning, others nodding in approval. One of them, a tall male with a jagged scar across his cheek, slapped Kayla on the shoulder. "So you have found your bonded mate at last." The small one has courage to speak the words. Evan raised his hands. "Hold on, I'm not anyone's mate." "I think you've all misunderstood." The male warrior laughed and shook his head. "Ah, he plays the ritual of modesty." "Yes, I know this well. Soon you will stand beside her in the proving circle." Kayla placed a heavy hand on Evan's shoulder. "You will not dishonor the bond. The proving will take place in 3 cycles. Until then, you will be prepared." Evan was too stunned to reply. He had heard enough about Virexen traditions to know they took honor seriously, dangerously seriously. If they believed he had made some kind of vow, refusing it could insult Kayla in front of her entire clan. And insulting a Phyrexian warrior was a fast way to end up in the station's medical bay. Or worse, the next hours passed in a blur. Kayla's warriors insisted on training him, which involved handing him a sword longer than his arm and laughing when he nearly dropped it. They gave him armor that was far too big and forced him to taste a steaming drink that burned his throat and made his eyes water. Apparently, this was a feast of strength. By the end of the evening, Evan sat on a bench outside the enclave, his head spinning. He could hear the warriors inside laughing and telling stories, their voices rising above the crackle of a large fire pit. Kayla stood nearby, sharpening her blade with slow, deliberate strokes. "You look troubled, human," she said without looking up. Evan rubbed his temples. "Trouble doesn't even begin to cover it. Where I come from, a compliment is just a nice thing you say to someone. It doesn't mean all this." She paused in her work and turned to face him fully. "On my world, words are weapons or bonds. You chose the bond, I accept." Evan looked up at her towering form and realized this was not going to be easy. She believed completely in what she was saying. There was no doubt in her voice, no room for argument. Somewhere deep inside, a small part of him admired that certainty, even if it was currently ruining his life. But the larger part of him knew he had to find a way out before the proving day arrived, because whatever that was, it didn't sound like something a human could survive. For now he nodded and forced a smile, trying to hide his panic. "All right, Kayla, let's see where this goes." But in his mind, the only thought was clear. He had to escape this cultural trap before it swallowed him whole. The following morning on the station began like any other for most of its inhabitants, but for Evan, the day started with a deep thud at the enclave door that echoed through the metal halls. Before he could even open his eyes properly, the sound of heavy footsteps filled the space, and Kayla's shadow fell over him. She told him to get up and prepare because the first stage of his duty was to begin. Evan tried to protest again, but her steady, unblinking gaze told him there would be no changing her mind today. He followed her reluctantly into a large training hall, where the air smelled faintly of oil and sweat. The floor was marked with circular patterns and the walls were lined with weapons of all kinds, from broadswords and spears to strange bladed hooks. Several Phyrexian warriors were already there, their massive frames casting long shadows under the hanging lights. They greeted Kayla with the respect due to a battle leader, but when their eyes fell on Evan, their expressions ranged from amusement to disbelief. One muttered something in their own language that caused the others to chuckle. Kayla introduced him formally as her chosen mate. She spoke with a voice that carried to every corner of the hall, her words filled with pride. Evan stood there wishing the ground would swallow him. In human terms, this was a disaster, but here in the enclave every nod and approving smile only confirmed the misunderstanding. The warriors seemed to think his presence was a great honor, proof that Kayla had found someone bold enough to bind himself to her. Training began without warning. Kayla tossed him a wooden practice sword that nearly pulled his arm out of its socket. She told him to stand in the center of the circle. A younger warrior stepped forward to face him, grinning like a predator about to pounce. The bout was not meant to harm him, Kayla explained, but to teach him the first lesson of Phyrexian duty, to face the circle without fear. The younger warrior advanced with quick, powerful swings. Evan tried to block, but the force behind each blow sent shocks up his arms. His balance wavered and he stumbled more than once, but the laughter from the sidelines only seemed to make Kayla more determined. She shouted instructions in her deep voice, telling him to keep his feet apart, to use his size to his advantage. Evan wanted to tell her that his size was the disadvantage here, but he kept swinging and somehow managed to stay on his feet until Kayla called an end. The warriors clapped their hands in approval. To them, he had passed the first test simply by surviving the match without fleeing. To Evan, it was a narrow escape from being knocked unconscious. Kayla clapped him on the back so hard it made him cough. She told him the proving circle would be far more difficult than this, and that they had much work to do. Over the next hours she led him through the enclave, showing him the customs and symbols of her people. She explained that the bond between a warrior and a mate was not only personal, but also political. By accepting him, she was making a statement to her clan and to rival clans. If he failed in his duty, it would not only shame her, but weaken her position in the eyes of her enemies. Evan began to see that this was not a simple misunderstanding to her. It was a matter of survival in a society built on strength and reputation. He also learned more about the proving day. It was a ceremonial event where the bonded mate had to endure a public challenge to prove worthiness. Sometimes it involved combat, other times a dangerous hunt or a test of endurance. The details were kept secret until the day itself, adding to the suspense. Kayla told him that refusing to take part would be seen as cowardice and would force her to fight in his place to defend the bond, a situation that would still bring shame. That night Evan sat alone in the corner of the common hall, thinking about his options. A human liaison for the station, a thin man named Daryl who had lived there for years, approached quietly. He had clearly heard the rumors about Evan and Kayla. Sitting down beside him, Daryl explained in a low voice that there was one possible way out that would not dishonor Kayla. According to an old Verexan law, if a mate saved the life of the warrior in a public setting before the proving day, the bond could be dissolved with honor. Evan leaned forward, hope flickering in his chest. That meant if he could somehow stage or find an opportunity to rescue Kayla, he could end this without insulting her. The challenge was finding such a moment. Kayla was not the type to need saving. If anything, she was more likely to be the one saving him. Still, the idea stayed in his mind as the only real path to freedom. The days that followed were strange. Kayla took him everywhere, to the market, to strategy meetings with her clan, even to a sparring match between two rival warriors. The more time he spent with her, the more he noticed small things behind her fierce exterior. She never ignored the greetings of the smallest stall owners. She shared food with her warriors before taking any herself, and when a young Verexan child fell in the market, she lifted them with surprising gentleness. It made his task harder. He needed to find a way to dissolve the bond, yet he was starting to understand why her people respected her so deeply. She was more than just a towering fighter. She was a leader who carried the weight of her clan's honor every day. One afternoon, at a diplomatic gathering between several alien races on the station, a group of warriors from a rival clan approached. Their leader, a tall male with steel-gray skin, insulted Kayla openly, questioning her choice of mate and mocking Evan's size. The air in the room grew tense. Kayla's hand went to the hilt of her blade, but before she could draw it, Evan stepped forward. He spoke clearly, turning the insult back on the rival leader with a quick comment about how much courage it took for someone so tall to hide behind words instead of action. The surrounding crowd let out a low murmur. The rival leader's jaw tightened, and he stepped back, unwilling to take the bait in front of so many witnesses. Kayla glanced down at Evan with an expression he had not seen before. It was not amusement or pity, but something like respect. She said nothing, only gave him a small nod before turning back to the gathering. Evan realized then that he was not just surviving in this alien culture, he was starting to influence it in small ways. But the proving day was drawing closer, and unless he found that one chance to save her publicly, he might still end up in the circle facing a trial no human had ever endured. The station's artificial night cycle had barely begun when Kayla appeared at Evan's quarters again. She told him the date for the proving was set. 3 days from now, the entire clan and many visitors from other races would gather to watch him fulfill his duty. Her tone carried no hint of doubt. In her mind, the event was as certain as the rising of the station lights each morning. Evan tried to mask the knot forming in his stomach. He had spent the past days thinking of nothing but the old law Daryl had told him about, the one that could free him if he saved Kella's life in public. But such an opportunity had not come. Kayla seemed almost impossible to harm. Even in tense situations, she moved with such control that danger rarely touched her. Training continued with more intensity. Kayla pushed him harder than before, making him practice with lighter weapons and forcing him to run through drills that left his arms and legs aching. The other warriors watched with growing interest, some placing bets on whether he would survive the proving. To them, the whole thing was entertainment. To Evan, it felt like the countdown to a disaster. Between training sessions, Kayla began to talk more openly about herself. She told him of her clan's history, how they had defended their homeworld against raiders for generations, and how each scar she bore carried a story. Evan listened carefully, not only because he needed to understand her better, but because he found her stories strangely captivating. There was a weight to her words, a sense that her life had been built on choices made under pressure and in the shadow of danger. One evening, after a particularly exhausting set of drills, Kayla led him to a high observation deck that overlooked the docking bays. Ships were coming and going under the glow of the station's guiding lights. She stood with her arms crossed, looking out over the scene. She told him that in her people's view, choosing a mate was not about romance as humans understood it. It was about trust, alliance, and the unspoken promise that each would stand for the other in any trial. To her, his compliment had been more than words. It had been the signal that he saw her strength and accepted the weight of standing beside it. Evan almost told her then that it had been a misunderstanding, but the look in her eyes stopped him. There was pride there, yes, but also a rare softness, as if she had allowed herself to believe in something for the first time in a long while. He could not take that from her in this moment. Instead, he nodded and let the silence between them hold. The next day brought a rare change in their routine. Kayla was invited to a formal reception hosted by the station's Central Council, a gathering meant to strengthen trade relations and maintain peace among the visiting species. Evan went with her, dressed in a simple but clean outfit that felt far more comfortable than the oversized armor. The hall was crowded with representatives from half a dozen worlds. The air was filled with the hum of conversation and the clink of glasses. At first the event seemed uneventful. Kayla moved through the room with the quiet authority of a leader, accepting respectful greetings from some and cold nods from others. Evan stayed close, keeping his eyes open for anything unusual. He told himself that this might be the place where the opportunity he had been waiting for would finally appear. And then it did. It began as a subtle shift in the air, a ripple of movement at the far side of the hall where servers were moving between tables. Evan noticed a group of figures slipping through the crowd with too much purpose in their steps. They were dressed as traders, but their hands stayed close to their belts where concealed weapons might be. His pulse quickened. He saw one of them glance toward Kayla and signal to the others. Before he could fully process it, the group fanned out, closing in. One of them pulled a blade that shimmered faintly in the light, a weapon made for piercing even Varexan armor. The crowd had not yet realized what was happening. Evan acted without thinking. He reached for the nearest table and shoved it hard, sending dishes crashing to the floor. The noise made the attackers hesitate for a fraction of a second, long enough for him to grab a heavy serving tray and hurl it at the one with the blade. The tray struck the attacker's arm, knocking the weapon aside. Kayla turned instantly, drawing her own blade in one smooth motion. The nearest attacker lunged at her, but Evan was already moving. pushing her out of the way as a second assailant's strike missed her by inches. The force of the shove sent her slightly off balance, giving her room to counterattack and drive the attackers back. The hall erupted into chaos. Guests scattered while security rushed in. Kayla fought like a storm, her blade flashing under the lights. But Evan's intervention had been the key moment. Without it, the first strike might have pierced her side before she could defend herself. When the last attacker was disarmed and dragged away, Kayla stood breathing hard, her gaze fixed on Evan. The crowd, now realizing what had happened, began to murmur. Word spread quickly. The human had saved the life of the Virexan warrior in front of dozens of witnesses. Kayla's clan members who had been at the reception stepped forward. One of them spoke in a formal tone, saying that the bond could be dissolved with full honor under the ancient law. The choice, they said, was now hers. Evan waited for her to speak, expecting relief, maybe even gratitude mixed with the decision to let him go. But Kayla's expression was unreadable. She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes narrowing slightly. Then she said, in a voice that carried to the far corners of the hall, that the bond would remain. The crowd reacted with surprise. Kayla explained that saving her life had not freed him of duty. It had proved his worthiness to stand beside her. She said he had shown courage not only in the circle but in the face of true danger, and that such a man was not to be released, but honored. Evan felt the weight of her words like a stone settling in his chest. The one chance he had been counting on had turned into a deeper entanglement. The proving was still ahead, and now the entire clan believed he had already proven himself in spirit. As they left the hall together, Kayla walked with a calm pride, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. For her, the matter was settled. For Evan, the trap had just closed tighter. The day of the proving arrived with the low hum of the station's morning systems coming online. Evan had barely slept, his mind turning over every possible outcome. The reception incident had not freed him as he had hoped. Instead, it had bound him more tightly in Kayla's eyes. Now there was no escape without shaming her, and the proving circle waited like a storm on the horizon. Kayla entered his quarters at dawn, dressed in ceremonial armor that gleamed under the artificial light. The black plates were edged in bronze, each piece etched with symbols of her clan's victories. Across her shoulders lay a fur mantle, and around her neck hung a chain of metal discs that clinked softly as she moved. She looked every inch the warrior leader her people believed her to be. She handed him a smaller set of armor, tailored in the last few days to fit him better than the earlier oversized plates. Though it was lighter than hers, it still felt heavy in his hands. They walked together through the station's inner halls toward the proving ground. The Enclave had reserved one of the large cargo arenas for the ceremony, its floor cleared of machinery and lined with banners. Word had spread far beyond the Virexan community, and as they entered, Evan saw that the stands were filled with not only her clan but members of other species, merchants, and curious station workers. The noise of so many voices echoed against the high walls, a living wave of sound. The proving ground was a wide circle marked with white lines on the metal floor. In the center lay a series of objects covered with dark cloths. Evan's stomach tightened. Whatever test awaited him was hidden under those cloths. Kayla led him to the middle and stood beside him as the clan elder stepped forward. The elder's voice carried easily over the crowd, announcing that today the human named Evan would stand in the proving for Kayla of the Iron Banners. The challenge, they said, would test not only strength but adaptability, for a true mate must meet danger with both courage and cunning. With a sharp motion, the elder pulled away the cloths, revealing 3 trials laid out before them. The first was a weapon rack holding several different blades, each a different size and shape. The second was a small mechanical beast, its body made of jointed metal limbs and a head shaped like the predators of the Virexan homeworld. The third was a high wall of steel panels with only narrow holds for climbing. The elder explained the order. First, Evan would choose a weapon and face the mechanical beast. Then he would have to disable it without destroying it. Finally, he would climb the wall while carrying a weighted banner to the top, planting it as a sign of his endurance. The crowd roared its approval, and Kayla gave him a single nod as if to say she trusted him to meet this test. Evan stepped to the weapon rack. He ignored the massive swords and heavy axes, knowing they would slow him down, and instead chose a short spear with a balanced weight. The moment he touched it, the mechanical beast came to life, its limbs clicking as it moved with predatory speed. It circled him, the metal claws scraping against the floor. He held the spear ready, remembering Kayla's training to keep his feet apart and his eyes on the target. When the beast lunged, he sidestepped and jabbed the spear into one of its front joints. The point slid between the plates, making it stagger. The crowd shouted in approval, but the beast recovered quickly, swinging a claw toward his head. He ducked under it and rolled to the side, using the spear to trip one of its legs. This time, when it fell, he moved in close, jamming the spear tip into a small access panel near its neck. Sparks flew, and the beast froze in place, its limbs locking. The elder announced the first trial complete, and Evan felt a surge of relief. But there was no time to rest. The second trial was the wall. He approached it, the weighted banner slung across his shoulder. The wall was taller than any structure he had climbed before, its steel surface broken only by the narrowest of ledges. He leapt for the first hold, his fingers straining to grip. The weight of the banner pulled at him, but he found a rhythm, moving from hold to hold, his muscles burning. Halfway up, his foot slipped, and the crowd gasped. For a moment he dangled by one arm, the banner dragging him down. He thought he might fall, but Kella's voice cut through the noise, telling him to use his legs, to trust the wall as much as his arms. Gritting his teeth, he swung his body back toward the holds and kept climbing. At last he reached the top, planting the banner into its slot. The crowd erupted in cheers, their voices filling the vast space. The elder declared the proving complete. But instead of relief, Evan felt a strange mix of exhaustion and something like pride. He had not been forced to fight another living being. Yet he had faced challenges designed to test him in front of all those eyes. Kayla stepped forward, taking his arm and raising it to the crowd. She told them that he had stood in the circle with courage and skill, and that such a man was worthy to stand beside her. The crowd's cheer was deafening. For them, the proving had confirmed what they already believed, that the bond was strong. As they left the proving ground, Kayla walked beside him with the calm satisfaction of a leader whose decision had been proven right. She spoke quietly, saying that today he had not only honored her but himself, and that their alliance was now unshakable. Evan did not reply at first. He was still catching his breath, still trying to understand how the proving had gone from a trial he dreaded to a moment that would forever tie him to her in the eyes of her people. He knew that whatever happened next, the choice he made in the final days of his time on the station would shape not only his own future, but hers as well. The proving had ended, but the real decision still lay ahead. Under the shadow of the towering alien city, the human stood on the bridge that connected the outer market to the great hall. His heart still carried the weight of the strange journey he had taken ever since he had spoken those simple words to the giantess. It seemed like a lifetime ago, when he had stood before her as nothing more than a visitor from a distant world. Yet now the fate of two peoples hung in the balance, and the decision lay heavy in his hands. The air was alive with the hum of distant engines, and the soft glow of the alien lights painted the metal streets in silver and blue. The giantess emerged from the great hall, her steps slow yet powerful each one, making the bridge quiver under the weight. She carried her eyes fixed on him, and there was no anger, no demand. Just a deep, unshakable resolve, the kind that comes when someone has chosen their path, no matter the cost. She told him that the Council had met and the elders had agreed. The alliance would stand, but there was a condition, and that condition was him. He listened as she explained that their worlds could not unite through words alone. It needed a symbol, something that both peoples could see and believe in. And the council had decided that symbol would be the bond between her and him. He felt his breath catch at the thought of it. He had never imagined that his compliment, that one innocent phrase, could lead to something like this yet. As he looked at her, he saw the truth in her words. This was no longer about him or her. It was about the survival of both worlds, about showing unity in a galaxy where mistrust could end civilizations. She told him that fulfilling his duty would mean standing by her side, not as a servant or a prize, but as an equal, as a partner, who would represent humanity in her world and her people in his. He thought of the long road that had brought him here, of the dangers they had faced together, the storms, the trials, the distrust, and the moments of quiet understanding between them. He thought of how she had shielded him when the great storm tore through the valley, and how she had stood firm when her own people had questioned his worth, and he knew then that his answer had been decided long before this moment. He stepped forward, the alien lights casting his shadow across the bridge, and told her that he would stand with her, not because it was his duty, but because it was his choice. And in that moment her eyes softened, and the faintest hint of a smile touched her face. The great hall doors opened wider, and the council stepped forward, their tall forms like carved stone, each one wearing the ceremonial bands of their station. They watched as the giantess placed her hand over his shoulder, a gesture of their culture that bound their pledge before all to see, and with that, the bond was sealed. The city seemed to breathe in unison, the hum of the engines rising like the sound of distant thunder. The crowd that had gathered on the lower streets erupted in a wave of voices, some cheering, some in awe, some whispering about the strange human who had dared to walk among the giants. He realized that the path ahead would not be easy, that there would be those on both sides who would doubt this alliance, who would see him as an intruder or her as a betrayer. But he also knew that together they had the strength to face whatever came next. In the days that followed, preparations began for the uniting ceremony. The alien city transformed, with banners of both worlds fluttering high above the plazas. Food from both cultures shared at long tables, and music that blended human rhythm with the deep resonating tones of the giants. As the ceremony began, he stood beside her, their hands joined in the old way of her people, and he felt the weight of history settle upon them. The council spoke of unity, of trust, and of the courage it took to see beyond the differences of size and strength, to the heart of what truly bound all living beings together. As the final words were spoken, the crowd lifted their voices in a song that seemed to shake the very air, a song that would be remembered for generations. Later, when the city quieted and the stars stretched out above them, she turned to him and asked if he regretted the path they had taken. He looked at her, the giant towers rising behind her, the light of distant galaxies reflected in her eyes, and he said that he had no regret, because a simple compliment had led him to this place, where two worlds could walk forward as one. And as they stood there on the highest bridge of the city, the future stretched out before them, not as a burden, but as a promise, one they would face side by side until the stars themselves grew dim. The end.